We get started, or do you want to wait another couple of minutes, Tiffany? What do you think?
I say let's rock and roll. Thanks everyone for being here.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. So my name is Suman Kapoor, CEO of Well Balanced Solutions, and I'm here with my co-host and dear friend Tiffany Castano, CEO of Suffer LLC. And we are thrilled to have our guest speaker here today, Rosalin Krieger. And Krieger, sorry about that. Thank you. And so we are excited to have her here. I'm just going to read her bio and I'm going to read it because she is an amazing woman with an amazing background. So Rosalin is a global speaker and consultant on race, racism, and white privilege from the Ashkenas Jewish Perspective. Thank you. Go for it. I appreciate that. I'm learning.
Hebrew word for German. So now often many of us refer to ourselves as either Ashkenaz or East European Jews.
Love it. Thank you. As the unstucker and a mindset expert, she helps people get unstuck, cultivate awareness, clarity, and transformation, especially in work transition with self-compassion. Rosalin is the creator of Brave Writing Workshops, a unique writing practice that helps nervous lay people express repressed feelings and unclear thoughts. She is also a visual artist and food culture expert in Toronto, Canada, healing from anxiety, trauma, and CPTS, which is child post-traumatic stress. We will put a bunch of links in the chat, especially to her Brave Writing Workshops. But welcome, Rosalin. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to start with why you wanted to be a guest speaker here with us.
Well, why didn't I? First of all, thank you, Tiffany and Suman. It's very important for people like me with my skin color to step into the breach. And for me, it's nothing new. I've been this way. We talked about this since I was about 8 years old. I don't like the term woke, but I guess I was woke before I knew what woke was, whatever that means. But I understood what it meant to be a decent human being, and decent human beings call out all the isms, especially racism, because I wasn't experiencing that. And I did experience anti-Jewishness, and this in itself was a very traumatic realization to wake up in a world where you realize you were one generation away from a genocide. But I also was very cognizant of living in North America in a major city, Toronto, and knowing how Black people were treated differently where I live, especially in the US. So I've always jumped into conversations around privilege, especially among white privilege, because there's still so much denial about it. There's gaslighting. And there are people, I think, who still are unwilling to come to terms with it. Maybe the guilt gets inverted, but if you can embrace it, understand that it's real, that you benefit from it, you're going to do a lot better in difficult conversations around anti-racism. So that's why I want to come here. And two, I'm here because the discussions on race and racism in general don't include people like me. It's often a binary, it's black and white, and life isn't black and white, and neither is race or racism. And I argued, in my graduate work that I occupy, me and other Jews like me, a liminal identity, often on the heels of whiteness, but not quite whiteness the way, for example, a white Catholic experiences whiteness, because they didn't have to deal with genocide and things like that from both, and also being always attacked on people on the left and people on the right. So I'm here to say, as the title says, that it's more complicated, and that's why we need to have these kinds of conversations and include people like me who honestly are talking about how they navigate the world with white privilege, but also have to do with anti-Jewishness as well. And I'm even fortunate, even my surname, doesn't, give me away. It gives me even privilege over Jews who have identifiable surnames, And I want to talk because on an everyday level, I can do things that Black people, for example, have a harder time doing. I can get a taxi cab anywhere. I am buzzed into every building. I've never been told you can't come in, wait at the door. I've never been asked for identification. And also, people assume I'm always born here. And even when they find out that I'm of Jewish descent, I often get what's called kind of, I think it's called philo-Semitic comments being made. Whoa, oh, you people are really smart. I'm like, oh, geez, okay. You know, so that too is used as a cudgel against African Americans, right? So for me, I'm here to talk about the honest implications of navigating white privilege. And that's why I knew I had to be a part of this conversation because you can't talk about it enough. You know, and last thing, I want to talk about that people like me need to be here because Black people are still being told you have to educate us about what we're doing to you. I mean, you know, I remember hearing that 30, 40 years ago when I first used to read Audre Lorde, you know, wonderful book. But I thought to myself, no, all of us who aren't Black, we have to participate, do our part to alleviate even a little bit the burden that Black people have to bear, the double burden of experiencing racism and having to educate others.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Roz. And I think, you know, one of the things we all know that, and especially I've seen it in the HR space with interviews and recruitment, and not that that's a focus for me in my business, but I've done it, I've seen it. I've been responsible for that and have, you know, we all sit with bias. And so our names are so much a part of our identity and our cultures. And you've heard Suman share on here too before about her name and how people have asked her to shorten it. And that's part of our identities. We can't do that. We shouldn't be. But I love that you're touching on the privilege that people have and even your own name as someone who is Jewish, but who recognizes I have privilege because of the color of my skin. And so thank you for sharing that with us. It's such an important point. I think, you know, as people of color, right? So I'm obviously a Black woman, and there, you know, are lots of different wonderful, beautiful people of all shades and ethnicities and sexual orientations, all of those things. But we have to realize that there is some discomfort around this topic, but it has to get talked about because the reality, as you shared, is, and I shared in the chat about someone who has to kind of look behind their back because they don't present as white. And so they don't have access to be at certain tables. They are often asked, you know, kind of grilled with interrogations on things, can't move about the world as other people can. And we cannot ignore that. And people get so stuck on the fact that because of who they are, if you say that and you say someone has privilege, that it means that they're racist. So I'd love to hear what your response is to that as someone who has light skin.
Yeah, you know, oh gosh, you know, there's the guilt mixed with defensiveness, mixed with denial is a really toxic cocktail. So what I try to do patiently, even when I encounter what I perceive to be, you know, unhelpful racist comments or insensitive comments on LinkedIn, I do my best to kindly say, you know what, this is what I'm hearing from you. Have you thought about this, or have you asked yourself why you're doing this? I'll give you an example. There are two photos that circulate a lot on LinkedIn. One is a group shot of Black men who are recent Harvard graduates. And actually there's also a female Black group photo as well. So about 2 weeks ago, somebody wrote, oh, white guy, can't we all just celebrate their win without their race? And he actually said that picture was racist. Yeah, exactly. So now most people are like, you this, you dumbbell. I thought, no, that's often been my gut reaction to do. I thought, no, I'm gonna do this. I said, do you understand that this photo historically is monumental? I said, it's not monumental for my community. We've been lawyers for God over 100 years in the US. You know, there's a thing called systemic racism. That's why this is an achievement. So, I'll be honest, though, I said that, I'm curious, I don't think you're generally angry about that. I said, I think you're doing a bit of gaslighting here. And maybe you don't want to acknowledge that this community has been historically held back because of racism. That's why there are so many firsts right now, and they need to be celebrated. And the last thing I said was, Black progress is good for all of us. So you have to take into account, the white scarcity, which is now really circulating. If you know, recently, actually, when I was reading about January 6th, when your capital was attacked by, white domestic, insurrectionists, there were a whole bunch of men there from, who are the Democrats, the blue states? I'm not sure. The red state? I'm not sure.
Blue states are Democrats, red states are Republican.
So there were straight people, men, white men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, gainfully employed. And they made up a very significant percentage of the white men who showed up January 6th. And there's this sense of them, of this, we are losing everything. Of course, they're not. And we don't want to share, which to me is so anti-American. I thought your country was about opportunity for all. It turns out, in their mind, it's not true. And as long as you have a zero-sum mentality, that there's only winning when you win over other people, you're going to see this type of aggression. And now that it's pretty much unchecked, I can only see it escalating. So now I really try to figure out, can I figure out intent? But I'm still seeing a little too much of, can't we all just get along well? No, because if we would have all gotten along 100, 200 years ago, we wouldn't be in this situation. We would have had Black lawyers 100 years ago, like all the other lawyers, but we don't. So let's enjoy and let's celebrate, and also try not to get snarky in the comments, because he was kind of snarky, and I thought, you're responding in a very kind of wounded, childish way. So I'm trying not to do that.
I love it. And we all, I know that you understand trauma. We all have trauma of some sort, even if, and I'm not trying to minimize the impacts of this pandemic, but hello, if you have no other trauma, some kind of trauma or difficulty, struggle has come out of this past year plus. And so people do, though, we make everything so personal for us, and it's not an easy thing. No one's saying it has to be comfortable, but where I get stuck, and a lot of people of color, is that, and even people who identify as non-cisgender, right? Like there's so much to diversity, equity, inclusion. And when you talk about belonging, you've now minimized that person's lived experience by saying, can we all just get along? And thinking that it should be one way or the other. Well, clearly, to your point, Rosalin, it hasn't been. And so the playing field has not been level. And we need people like you and other people to help us have access. There are people, I'm from Milwaukee, and it's a very segregated city. And you have, the north side of Milwaukee where there are, it's predominantly Black, and it's the inner city. People don't have access. There's no equity. They don't know what they don't know. And so unless you bring these things to the forefront, you create a path, and we bring awareness, people feel stuck and they don't have the same opportunities. And that's just a fact. It doesn't mean that something is being taken from you because someone else gained something, right? That's not a winner's mindset. So I'm so glad you shared that.
It isn't. And I was going to say something moments ago, I think I forgot, but again, this is important. Now people ask, okay, so how can you use your white privilege? That's why I'm here today as well. Well, by doing this, by talking, because I remember 20 years ago, I had a job in a mall, and there was a really racist guy. And sometimes people, when they share my skin color, they assume I think like them. He goes, I got all these. First he goes, I got some Jew jokes for you. I go, oh boy, here we go. And then he had other. I said, no, thank you. Right. So you cannot be quiet and say, I'm anti-racist. You need to be vocal. You got to put yourself out there. 2, read books written by Black people. Okay, so great books like Americana by Ngozi Adichie. Okay, again, we're gonna plug thrift books. We all love thrift books, you know. So you can't say, I don't know what to do. If you're using your phone, you're on LinkedIn, you know what to do. And if you're not doing yourself, ask yourself why. Not to make yourself feel guilty, not to shame yourself, but ask yourself, why am I not reading books by Black people? Why am I not reading books by South Asian people? Why? Like I honestly, I don't get it, you know. So those are different ways. And also as a teacher, you know, before I had to hear a lot of horrific comments from my students. You know, I think I told you a couple of them a while ago. They have to be addressed, because chances are you may be the only person who ever tells them, I'm uncomfortable with what you said was wrong, and here's why. Because I still think, I don't think enough people are calling out their students, co-workers, you know, people in their family. That's probably the hardest thing to do. I get a lot of pushback, but I still do it. Because I go, come on, you know. So, and those are hard conversations, but there are people who, you know, they really can't see it sometimes. They really can't see privilege, you know, but it permeates every part of our lives, where we are allowed to live, where we get to work, how we move around the city is all decided by race. And by the way, I always use the term racism. We're talking about racism, not necessarily race. I notice in the US, conversations about racism are always framed as a talk about race. And maybe that's sometimes, you know, in deference, I'm not saying in this case, but being worried about, oh, I don't want to give the white people angry, you know, and but I'm okay with people getting angry with me. I can handle it. And also, I think we need to have more real conversations, because when I think about the violence, the historical violence that have been perpetrated on African Americans, on African American women's bodies, still, right? And it's still, I think people are refusing to look at it, right? Have the guts to look and say, yes, this is what my country did. This is what it still does, and it's not right. So I definitely, that's why I talk forever. I'll talk until I die about this, because if you're not, I think you're being complacent, and you're truly not being a global citizen. I mean, that's how I feel.
Yeah, I love that, Rosalin. I mean, people already in just general society and general subjects don't like to acknowledge fault. And then you throw this heavy weight of race and racism, and acknowledging maybe not you as the individual, but historically your people have created and built a society around racism. And here, after hundreds of years post-slavery, we are still dealing with this conversation. People are scared to do that, right? Because they're afraid to confront their history, their family stories, the fault that their family may have played in the role of slavery and where we are today. And I get it. Those are such difficult emotions and stories to confront. But as people and as a society, we need to, in order to move forward. right? And so the work that you're doing and having these conversations, and that the work that you are doing is so powerful, again, because of the way you present, right? And then we add the layer of your ancestry to it, and it makes it even more powerful in my eyes. And so I've loved everything that you've talked about so far. It's been amazing.
Thank you. And also, there are people think, okay, I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. You know what? It's a journey. I've been working on, evolving into an anti-racist for over 45 years. And I don't think there's any one way to do it. There's no perfect way to do it, but you got to start. You got to at least start and have the courage to make mistakes. Yes, some people are going to bite your head off. Okay, it's going to happen, but don't use that as an excuse not to do it. And it's so rewarding when you're actively using the power that you have to actually move that needle, move that glacier. This is important. And at the very least, people in my country, we have to start being honest about, genocide against First Nations. We keep finding more unmarked graves, and our government is still fighting First Nations for their due, for God's sake, for clean, safe water. And all of this wealth in your country is built upon slavery. And if you can't, I wasn't there. No, you weren't there. But that has to be taught in schools. I learned last year that most of your textbooks come out of Texas, and they don't even include this history. It actually, gaslights and lies about a lot of the history. How is that possible in 2021? So my hope is to invite more people to check your ego at the door. You're going to get your hands muddy. You're going to get your ego stepped on. That's where you have to check your ego at the door. And just listen. For once in your life, just listen. When I think of Jane Elliott, I want to see a whole fleet of Jane Elliott's, known for, is it the bluest, the Eye of the Storm? What was the original thing she did? She created a program, a white teacher, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And my God, the work that she's done. This is one non-Black woman, and she's still alive, and she calls out white people on their bullshit. And they go, oh, Black people got it good. There's this clip that's online again. Okay, raise your hands, white people. Who wants to be a Black person? Crickets. Nope, so there you go. You answered your question. So you know what's being done. You know what's being done. Remember, Chris Rock said, I'm rich, but you don't want to be me. So let's cut the bull. Let's be honest, because now we're living in a world, where propaganda, replaces truth-telling more than ever. Where people are saying, Black is white and gray is whatever. And it's even harder now. So in my own little way, I find ways to correct people and say, no, and this is a truth statement. A year and a half ago, before the pandemic, I was teaching SSAT in Toronto, Canada. And one Asian student said, Black people like slavery. Yeah, Tiffany, I go, well, I go, what? I go, okay, first of all, I go, that's not true. That's not true. And what happened is that, and I said a few other things nicely, and the student began to cry. I said, you want to have we go outside? He goes, yeah. He goes, I go, what, why are you crying? He goes, I feel stupid. And I said, you think I haven't said stupid stuff? I said, it's okay, you're learning. I said, but now you know that you can't say that anymore. Right? You learned something today, but be prepared to say stupid things, because as much as they hurt to say, I think I'm glad I heard it in my class. I know, Tiffany, it's an awful thing he said, but he said it in front of me. And this was in a school where I don't think any other teacher called out kids when they said stuff like that. This was the same class where another student said Hitler was good to the Jews. Yeah. So these are the kind of comments I had to deal with as an SSA teacher, and this was in 2019. Right? And again, I'm not here to shame anybody. I'm here to tell you, I'm going to intervene. I'm going to call you out when you're saying things that are really unacceptable. It's not about freedom of speech at all. It's about, you can say what you want, but I'll be the one person in the room who's going to call you out.
Thank you so much, Rosalin. Like Tiffany put in there, it's such a good point about using your position of power to influence, right? But I'm wondering if we can take a step back, right? So I'm curious, I know you talked about you were about 8 or 9 when you started to find your voice and really push back on these things. But how would you suggest that people who want to start this journey or are kind of stuck in this journey on how to have these difficult conversations around race, especially presenting white, what suggestions, tips, sort of, how did you sort of find that strength and power? I'd love to hear. Yes, the book.
Read a damn book, people. Sorry for swearing. Just read a book. But before you do that, because Suman, it's so easy. You know what? I taught a class a year and a half ago, the only class in Toronto at a very reputable university called Rosalin University. It was solely focused on women artists of color. Artists like Nona Faustine and, oh gosh, Faith Ringgold, who's still alive, by the way. And it was mostly 2 very privileged white women. And they said, wow, these women are great. This class is great. And I go, I'm going to ask you a question. I go, how come you don't know about any of these people? Because you've got phones. There's a thing called Google. And yet you didn't think to Google, which is what I did, Black women artists, South Asian women artists. That's all I did, right? You don't have to go to the library anymore. I just Googled because I go, I want to know, what art are these women making? And it turns out, they're making incredibly brave art. Oh my God, like Nona Faustine is a very bold, large-sized Black American woman photographer who poses naked in front of spots in New York City where Black people were auctioned off. She taught me so much. So if you just Google one Black woman artist, I'll put her, Nona Faustine, no, Nona Faustine. Nona, it's Faustine. I'll type it here. There it is.
Sorry, can't delete that one, but it's pretty art in there.
No, Nona Faustine, and I thought, who is this woman? She's so, God, she's so brave because, she didn't have permits. So her sister would take the shot, she'd set it up before the police could come, and then they would run away. I mean, I didn't know there were plantations in New York State. So, and that, if you learn about one Black artist a week, one Black neighbor a week, imagine what you could learn. And it goes without saying, get some brown friends for God's sake. I mean, come on. And not just like, hi Marjorie, how are you doing? Not the coffee, the cooler talk. Get to know your Black friends. Really get to know them. And listen to them. And don't go, well, God, you're just another angry Black woman. Oh, you guys are always complaining. You know what? You and I never had to give our kids the police talk. You're and I never knew one Jewish person who looks like me who grew up hearing the police talk. I never got told the police talk. Okay, Rosalin, when the police pull you over, try not to get killed. This is how you do it. Okay, that's privilege right there. And also read books. I talked about this book by Chang Reng Lee, native speaker. He's a Korean American writer. A wonderful, amazing, difficult discussion on tensions between African Americans and Korean Americans I think it's set in the late 80s, early 90s in New York City. This is brave stuff. This is brave stuff. You know, it doesn't take much, you know, to actually, so start, you know, you Google, learn, you know, consume, you know, art made by people who don't look like you. Support people who don't look like you. I recommend Black people, especially on this platform, almost every minute of the day. I go, you get on, follow Tiffany, you get on Daryl Perry's show, you know, all these things. They're so easy to do and they cost you nothing. They cost you nothing. So do it. Do it. Like we say in Yiddish, be a mensch. Be a good person. It takes so little. That's why I love, for example, I love Daryl Perry's show, Black Excellence. I love that show. You know, and one thing I'm going to say too, I've been noticing during the pandemic, there are wonderful groups popping up, for example, to support Black women during, you know, especially after the murder of George Floyd. You know what? I'm sad to say, I'm often usually the only non-Black woman in the Zoom. Come on. And then there are people on LinkedIn go, this isn't part of LinkedIn. Yes, it is, because racism keeps people from getting the jobs they deserve. But look at all the things I read about how Black women have their hair policed. Still, you can't wear this, you can't do this. Come on, people. Hair is hair. You can't say this hair is professional and this hair is not. Just stop it. Just stop it. You know, don't be like your parents and grandparents. You can do better. So just start with that. You know, it's so easy. Go to like for example, my food tours in Toronto were mostly to businesses owned by people of color. Start with the food. That's always easiest. So start with the food, cultivate real friendships, Google artists of color, read books written by Black people. Oh, sorry, progressive Black people. Yeah. Oh yeah, what's the Crown Act, Tiffany? Tell me.
So it's basically, now I don't know if it's like, I can't recall if it's federal, and this sounds terrible for me to say as an HR, but listen, there's a lot of things I have to go on here in my daily life, but about our hair, right? Like, because people have not been able to authentically show up as themselves. Some people want to do, you know, their afros, natural hair that has not always been celebrated. Even my Latina friend, she felt like she had to straighten her hair so that she could fit in because it was more acceptable. It made her closer to, you know, white proximity, right? And that's just a thing. So we have stuff like that because of the fact that people can't even show up in their hair, and they were being discriminated against because they were seen as less presentable, particularly Black women. And that's just not okay. First of all, like, even from an HR perspective, you know, it used to be like, you have to wear, you know, stockings and you can't wear open toe shoes and all these things. So that's come a long way. But then even as we advanced there, we were still discriminating against people because of how they appeared, how they looked and how they showed up because they decided to wear their hair kinky or something. Well, that's part of someone's identity. And the fact that we have to make laws about hair, we're all born with hair. It's sad, really.
Yeah, so there too, I'm gonna worry about hair. You know, okay, not my hair, I'm old and gray, I'm experiencing maybe ageism, but I never had to worry, you know, gee, should I go get my hair relaxed? Which, by the way, from what I heard, it's not that relaxing. When I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and he explained conking, what it was called, when they would burn, Black people would burn their hair. Holy cow, that's just mind-blowing. You know, but what strikes me as still problematic is when I chime in, is when the denial around racism and especially around white supremacy, for example, in marketing and things like that, or skin lightening products. Oh, it's a personal choice. It's no big deal. It's rooted in history. So it's your choice to be anti-historical and to act as if we float around in space without context. So that too, I think these people are being disingenuous. So I go, you know what, I won't pursue it because you are being disingenuous.
Wow, Suman, I just saw your comment in there too, around hair. Like, I feel like it's very, very well known in terms of like Black hair, like, and there's, you know, people even in the Black community, like will joke about like, don't touch a Black woman's hair. And that's very true. Like, please don't. Why are we touching people anyway? And I, my own HR thinks about that, but you know, I think sometimes it's forgotten that other people, Suman and I have talked about hair a lot because of her daughter, because of just the differences. We talk about, you know, assumptions that get made, like, and honestly, again, we all sit with bias. She and I had an honest conversation about hair, and she was talking about her hair texture. And I learned things that I didn't realize. I assumed Suman's hair was like white people's hair, and that my hair is the only hair that's, you know, kinkier. But that's not true. Even white people have different textures of hair, right? And so I knew that, but we have these inherent biases and things. And so even as a Black person, and I feel this is very important to share, that we can sit with privilege too. I had opportunities and access that some people didn't have. I didn't have full access because my skin is brown, but that doesn't mean that I don't sit with privilege too. And I try to share this message with people because there's this huge myth out there that only white people, yes, great book, thank you. We'll drop that in the chat too. That only white people can sit with privilege. Not the case. We can all do that. When we talked about these power structures, use your power, no matter what your skin looks like, no matter how you identify, to be able to shift some of these power structures. As an HR professional, I have a lot of privilege and access to opportunities, information, influence that I sure as hell better be using, right? Even if I was a white lady, even if I was a white man, as that structure in that role, you have a responsibility and you should be accountable to that. So important to share. I can get off my soapbox, pass the collection plate. We always talk about going to church up in here.
You know, that's why Daryl Perry has been one of my LinkedIn coaches. You know, he is so successful, you know, so humble and caring. I couldn't imagine, you know, returning to LinkedIn without him, without Cher Jones. Got to talk about Cher Jones. You know, there's this, you know, myth around, you know, Black bodies that, you know, you're not professional, you're not, you know, you're not to be trusted, you're not to be invested in. God, that's so wrong, because that's where I'm putting my money and time. You know, and I'm not a fool, and I couldn't imagine. You know, I mean, list goes on and on. So many people to thank. You know, and I just wish people would just find the courage to say, you know, we used to do things this way, but you know what? I'm willing to change. You know, and I'm the daughter of a very racist father. I mean, this I have to tell you this. You know, he was like a Jewish Archie Bunker. If people are old enough to watch All in the Family, that's what I grew up with. Now, if I can come out pretty decent, there's hope for everybody. Okay, there's hope for us all. So don't use you know, your family culture to say, well, you know, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. Okay, you don't have to ruffle feathers at home, but you sure got to do them outside home. You just do. Yes, I saw the documentary on Chris Rock. My favorite scene is when he tries to sell black hair, and nobody wants the black hair. Yeah, and there too, I'm interested in how is it that, and this is not to go after Korean Americans, or Koreans, but how did Koreans come to like dominate the black hair market? I find this really, really bizarre. It's a product, you know, designed for Black people, yet Black people don't, you know, own the means to in this industry. I find it very interesting as well. And that's touched a bit upon in the Chris Rock documentary.
I think it's that's an interesting question, and I know you, Suman, and I had a little bit of that discussion when we were talking about kind of planning, right, for the discussion today. And I find that interesting too. And I think, you know, we know that sometimes money is the root of all evil. And I'm not saying that Korean people are evil, so please do not mistake me for that. But I think that what we see is very telling of a structure, especially here in the US, where a lot of stuff is about capitalism, right? And again, I'm not getting on a political soapbox, so don't kind of make sure that I'm clear, but there is something to that. And we still, like, even though I'm saying it's not political or that I'm not targeting specific ethnicities, we still have to have honest conversations, right? And there still has to be awareness to the fact that money does drive a lot of this stuff. Things have been taken away from people. Access has not been granted. People have different privileges and access because of money or their socioeconomic status. And so we can't leave those conversations off the table, because then how do we move forward? That is the very crux of how we get in these systems of oppression, because we don't want to be honest. We don't want to give up what we have, because if I give you something, then I lose, right? Back to what we were saying before.
No, we got to have these conversations. And when you call out someone's privilege like mine, you can do it without being a bigot. I'll give you an example. So you can say, well, Rosalin, you know, you've got more privilege than me because you are of Jewish descent, you're light skinned. I get it. That's a good way to say it. But when you say that, which sometimes happen in a bigoted way, then of course it becomes problematic. So we can say, for example, wonder how it is in the case of the Black hair industry. You know, how is it that one community is able to dominate it, whereas one isn't able to? That's not a coincidence. There's no nefarious scheme behind it. Okay, you know. As some people say, well, okay, well, Jewish Americans are successful because Jews own this, blah, blah. No, sorry, it's not about that. But it's about how racial frameworks have historically been constructed over the last 100 years, which has enabled Jews like me to have more advantages, you know, at the expense of Black people and other brown people. But it's not because we are, you know, part of a cabal, which is the usual garbage I have to live with. It's not about that. You know, it's about addressing systemic racism. That's what it's about. Yeah. Oh, who mentioned Georgia Musi? What's that?
Well, so the show, The Jeffersons, back in the 70s, right? Like, so as Tiffany said, you can even be a person of color and be racist, right? So we had Archie Bunker, and way it flipped on the other side was George Jefferson. But I grew up watching those shows, and while we laughed at it, I actually appreciated shows like that because they, in a comedic kind of way, really called out the level of racism, and yet the friendship that bonded those two, right? In a very interesting way. How, I mean, they dealt with George Jefferson's son falling in love with, I think, Archie Bunker's daughter at one point. And it was very interesting how that Black and white relationship.
Yeah, one of the first episodes was a few, because I mean, I have a mind like I still check because I wrote about TV. So on the Family, Lionel is dating, I think, Archie's niece. And he's like, oh my God, like he freaks out. And then we see George doesn't like his son, his son's future wife, because she has one white father, right? So that's how it played out. I think it's important also, there's actually there's a wonderful Canadian writer named Shri something, who actually wonderfully calls out anti-Black racism within her Indian community in Toronto. And man, she's getting burned, but she still does it, which I think is so wonderful for using her platform for a major newspaper to say, let's get honest. So for example, also calling out, oh gosh, what's her name? She's also Canadian. Oh gosh, and she often appropriates, she speaks like a Black person does from the US and braids her hair. I forget, she now has a talk show. And
Lily Singh.
That's her. Yeah.
Love Lily Singh. She's my girl.
I go, but Lily, like, what are you doing blackface? Like, what are you doing, Lily? Can you at least acknowledge you're appropriating, you know, a way of a culture? At least, you know, pay it forward. And she doesn't. So I know there's been pushback against that, but I applauded her for calling out Lily Singh for that, because I always found Lily irksome, you know. So yeah. So I think the more we have this kind of conversation, the more we can open up not just talks between Black and white people, but between, you know, let's say South Koreans and Black people and South Asians, because these are conversations that are long overdue. They really are. And we got to figure out, now, are we going to agree all the time? No, but we got to be able to have difficult exchanges without resorting to violence, bigotry, and other forms of aggression. We have to do it. This is 2021. Got to do it.
Yes, it's 2021, and it should have been done many, many years ago. And I do, you know, it seems like, I mean, we definitely have come full circle on this series in terms of where we started. I said this in the chat earlier, but that's how Suman and I started this series. It's to create a safe space to help people understand how do I kind of move into this space of having this conversation. What if I make a misstep, right? Like you shared, and thank you for doing so eloquently, Roz. I think that, you know, we are long overdue for this, but we've kind of come back full circle. Like, it's gonna start with, how do you start the conversation? Then what happens? And what if you do mess up? And literally, those 3 pillars, I literally just did a training on a lot of stuff, but that was a core of it. Even when you talk about just like discipline and things in the workplace, we have options, power, opportunities there as well. And so you have to use that responsibly. And we can't just let the fear of starting the conversation, because then it's gonna, like anything, it just like boils over. You have to be able to start it. And I think what's important too is you've sent a whole bunch of resources besides George and Wheezy. We're talking about a lot of other resources in the chat here. And for Team Replay, we see y'all too. We'll make sure that you get access to all of these resources when we repost this on YouTube. But I want to make sure that people also know that this is just something that we're all responsible for. And maybe your way is reading a book. It doesn't mean that we expect you to go out and shout Black Lives Matter, get the t-shirt, do all the things, because if it's disingenuous, that's not going to help in the first place. But maybe your way is supporting a Black content creator. Maybe your way is supporting a Black restaurant or an Asian restaurant. Whatever that looks like, you know, support your community, do what makes you comfortable. No one's saying like step that far out of your comfort zone. I'll be honest and say, I'm not the person who's going to be going and marching and doing things, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that's heavy lifting that I do too. So we're all in a different place in our journey. You have to give grace and meet people where they're at on their journey, but you do have to be a part of the solution. I don't know if I'm going to go so far right now as to say you're part of the problem, or that you're the problem if you're not. But I know some subscribe to that. But you got to do something.
Say it. You are part of the problem. Yes, you are. Say it. You are. If you're not being a decent human being, as I said, if you're not fulfilling your civic duties, you are part of the problem. You say,
Very fair. Very fair.
What can I do? You are. It starts with one person. So do something. And no, like, oh, I'm tired of hearing about DEI. Well, of course, because you're privileged, you don't have to think about DEI. I often forget about a person in a wheelchair who's visually impaired. I forget, but hopefully, thankfully, they remind me, please don't forget about me. You know, and I put the eye roll in because I know we're going back to work now. People go, oh, I don't want to hear any more about this. I don't want to hear about BLM. Well, until they stop murdering Black people disproportionately because of a traffic stop, you are going to hear about it. What do you want Black people to do? Really, what would you do in their situation? What would you do? For once, think about it. What it's like to be a Black mother and have to worry about, will my son come home tonight? That's a real worry. It's real. Think about it before you say, I don't want to hear it. I don't have time for it. No, or it doesn't belong on the platform. It does, because Black people work. So it's part of the platform.
I love that you said that too, because you already know how I feel, how strongly I feel as a content creator about this isn't Facebook, this isn't, guess what? We show up at work and every space that we enter as humans first. This people who say that, it's ridiculous. You don't like it. Like I tell people, I've done like 3-4 videos like this. Scroll by. You don't have to be disrespectful to people, because what you do is you minimize their experience and the lived experiences of other people. And even if it's a non-person of color, you know, as women, we have our struggles too, right? But I've seen men sit there and be dismissive to women, like, oh, here she goes again, the emotional appeal, you know, all the things. We have to stop trying to strip away what makes someone them. Shout out to people who want to be empathetic and vulnerable. I'm here for that all day. Why would you ever try to take that experience away from someone? So thanks for sharing that.
Well, I don't know what it is. You know, we're a complex species. There's no one size fits it all solution, but you know, you got to start somewhere. You know, and today, I mean, how long? Or if you're not doing anything, if you're not supporting Black business, if you aren't reading Black authors, if you aren't concerned about what's that thing called, immunity, that police officer thing, acquired immunity, what's it called, where they get to pretty much, you know, not be accountable. You know, come on, you know, your country's in a crisis. Like, no, okay, it isn't 1942, but you've got a wave of fascism that has grabbed hold of too many people in your country. You know, this is called being a good neighbor. It's more than mowing a person's lawn or helping them with the garbage. You really got to help them with this serious lifting here, and that's why I can't talk about this enough.
And we appreciate you, Rosalin, for taking the time to talk about this, right? I think that's, you mentioned before, that's another way to move the conversation forward, is that people need to step up, have these difficult conversations. And even just to listen to the way that you're talking, you're so passionate about this, but there's so many ways that you have phrased things that I've written down. And I'm like, I could use that, right? That's a great way to reframe the conversation. That's the way, I like the way she said that. And so I think that is also really important, and why I enjoy these sort of conversations, because I'm learning different ways of stating a statement, right? And so I appreciate that very much. We've had some really great, we're coming up to the hour here. We've had some really great conversations in the chat. If you haven't saved it, I recommend saving it. There are a lot of resources, but as Tiffany mentioned, we will make sure that the resources get put into, when we repost on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel, we'll make sure that we put in some of the resources that have been shared here. I didn't know if anyone had any thoughts, questions, anything else they wanted to share, or Rosalin, if you wanted to sort of wrap things up for us.
Let's see. Does Rosalin come with an off switch? Yes, she does.
No, she doesn't. No, it's pause.
Yes, but when she's away, this is what comes out. Okay? Because it has to come out. This is an emergency. I'm not talking here out of luxury. This isn't self-indulgent. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. I'm asking you to be accountable. Be accountable. Be a mensch. Be a truly good neighbor, and not just put likes and hearts on people's posts when Black people are pouring their hearts out on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Their pain is real. Don't add to it. Do something about it. And if you do something about it, you're gonna die a lot happier. You really want to die knowing you could have done something better and made your life a little bit easier? You want that on your conscience? I know I don't.
Thank you again, Rosalin. It's been an honor to have you here today. The
pleasure.
words that you shared are powerful. Your stories were powerful. And I hope it showed our audience, whether those here live or whether those who are going to watch this on replay, how to really step in, right? And how to be that ally, how to learn and go on your own journey, the different ways. Like Tiffany said, there's not just one way. And Start with the book, start with reading, do that self-reflection, find your voice. If you're not going to go out and march, that's fine. Maybe you support an organization, right? Or you have a one-to-one conversation instead of in a big group. So I appreciate all the golden nuggets you shared with us. I appreciate you as an ally and as a friend. Thank you so much for all that you do, period. Thank you.
Oh, Suman, one more thing.
Yes.
Whoever's going to watch this, you know, if you don't connect with anything we've said today, I'm going to invite you to do something. Ask yourself why. You don't have to tell Tiffany, Suman, or me the answer, but ask yourself why. Why are you so resistant for working towards the common good? Why? Just ask yourself why.
I love that. That's a great way to end. Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of the Friday and a safe holiday weekend for those of you in the US. And we'll see you next Friday with another guest speaker.
Yes, we can't wait. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.